How's everybody doing? You know, I'm looking forward to this weekend or this next Thanksgiving holiday. I'm looking forward to Wednesday night. I actually found a German chocolate pecan pie recipe that I have never made, and I'm trying to get the rest of the stuff together, but this looks really good. So I encourage you to find your best pie. Come on out. It's just a chance to just connect and be family. And at this time, I want to encourage you all. Hey, by the way, hello, Encounter Church Online community. How are you doing? Really that good? I'm so glad to hear from you. No, I can't actually hear from them, but it's good to have you with us. We know God has good things ahead for you, and we're just excited for you to share this message with us and just connect with us by text, message, email, whatever you need to do. We'd love to hear from you. But this message is a continuation of I don't know if I want to call it a series or just a continuation of messages about how we share Jesus and love to our city and world. How do we flow in the gifts of the Spirit? How do we become people of influence in our generation? And what I'm teaching out of is essentially the book of 1 Peter, the whole book. And we're not going to cover all the verses, although there's only 105 of them. And you can literally read it out loud in 13 minutes. Seriously, I read it out loud 12 minutes and 57 seconds. So I tested it. See there, I wouldn't say that. So I encourage you, if you have not read 1 Peter in a while, to read it this afternoon at halftime while the Broncos are licking their wounds or whatever is going on. But you can just, read it because it is about how we as believers can live in this kind of corrupt generation. Because he's writing to a group of early Christians who have a very similar experience to us, and how they can be effective at sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, the reason this is on my heart specifically so strongly is because of three things that happened to me over the last about 10 days. And some of you may be aware of this, but there was quite a bit of national press about Chick-fil-A's ceasing to support the Salvation Army, although their contract ran out. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't want to get into politics. That's not what I do. But we as a church support the Salvation Army. And this is why we do it. They are an organization that does good and serves people irrespective of who they are. They do not discriminate against anybody. They are unashamedly Christian. But they serve you regardless of gender orientation, sexual orientation, political belief, socioeconomic status, racial background. They don't care who you are. They just want to demonstrate the love of God. And so it was difficult for me to hear the criticism of the Salvation Army because it's exactly that kind of non-discriminatory behavior that causes us to support them and to want to get behind them. So when they get criticized for what they believe rather than what they do, it makes me nervous. But I shouldn't be nervous because I need to trust in God, which is one of the things Peter talks about. I had something else happen to me. You know, we went down to Tulsa, my son and I, David, and we were checking out ORU. I'm going to talk about that more in a second. But on the way down there, we're at DIA, and I had something happen to me that has never happened to me in 35 years of traveling. I happened to see, and again, I was not peering at other people's cell phones, but there was a woman executive. She was dressed as an executive. She had her phone out like that, and it's 7:30 in the morning, and she is exchanging naked pictures with somebody. And I'm sitting there going, well, that's something you don't see every day, I hope. And I looked at my son, making sure he's playing a video game. Good, you just keep watching the video game. You'll be fine. And it's not like she's hiding it. She's got her phone up like this, and I'm just like, I've never seen that before. Honestly, from a man or a woman. But apparently this is common. I'm just behind the times. And all I could think of is, when did this happen? And again, it was just strange. And so the third thing that happened is when we got to ORU, they had a chapel service, and you had all the parents on one section, the kids were in another. And I got to sit by the parent of a young lady that is, looking at Oral Roberts University for her career, for her pursuit. And her dad was talking to me. Now, he said, I am a person that is very protective of my 6 kids. We homeschool, and we attend a home church. And so my kids, he said, freely, they've been raised in a very cloistered or separated environment. I've been very protective over what comes into our home. I want them to have a healthy environment. All of that is good. I'm not against any of that. We didn't do all that, but that was what he felt he should do as a father. But he said, my struggle as a father is my daughter's an adult now, and she's going out into the world. And I'm concerned with how she's going to handle all of the influences and all of because her normal is very different from what they encounter out there. And so Oral Roberts was what he felt was a good transitional, because they have a very strong spiritual atmosphere on the campus. And so as I was musing on those things, it caused me to consider two questions. The first is this, that as a Christian and as a pastor, how do I, for myself, and how do I help you follow the lifestyle that Jesus and the apostles taught when it grows increasingly different from what's common around us? How do we do this? And perhaps even more importantly, how do we become effective at sharing Jesus and love in a culture that doesn't seem to want to listen to what we have to say? We have the message of life. Paul said in I think it's Romans 16, that I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for I'm paraphrasing, for salvation, first for the Jews and then for the Gentiles. And he says these things, and there is no other name under heaven or earth by which men can be saved. It is an important message. But how do we effectively share it? Fortunately, we have the Bible. And 1 Peter is all about being a follower of Christ in a non-Christian environment. First of all, it's clear from Peter's writings that you can't go against the grain without facing resistance. And let me be clear, Jesus asks us as his disciples to live in a way that goes against the grain of what is normal. And when you do that, you're going to face resistance. And in fact, he said in 1 Peter 1:6, "So be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead. Even though you must," say must, "endure many trials for a little while." I thought we didn't have to go through that. Jesus was going to make us the head and not the tail. We were over above and not beneath, blah, blah. Hey, general's the wrong word. People, you must endure many trials for a little while. Peter talks in his epistle about how to deal with persecution and opposition. He talks about how to live surrounded by a culture very different from what the Bible teaches. He talks about how to be married to an unsaved person. There's a lot of people married to unsaved people or uncommitted people. He talks about how to work with an unsaved boss in a non-Christian environment. He talks about how to live under unsaved politicians. And in all of these situations, there are some common themes about his advice on how to deal with it. Perhaps the most important is this, that we need to live with an eternal perspective and a trust in a just God. We can't just focus on what's happening around us. The object of my relationship with God is not to make my life wonderful in this life, although he does make my life wonderful in many, many ways. But the object of my life is to be a fully committed follower of Christ and to encounter him and to walk into my next life of eternity with him looking at me and saying, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." We have to have an eternal focus. And we have to trust that God is just. 1 Peter 1:13 says, "Prepare your minds for action. Exercise self-control. Put all your hope in the gracious salvation that will come to you when Jesus Christ is revealed to the world." Because we have an eternal perspective, we recognize that God will intentionally put you into difficult situations and circumstances with difficult and challenging people. He'll put you in there because he wants to have light and dark. Because we have an eternal perspective, we don't think it's strange that when we come to Christ and we're living in a family situation that is decidedly non-Christian, or in a job situation that is decidedly not Christian, we don't think it's strange that God says, "Stay there. Stay there. I want you to stay in that place and become light to darkness." Because we have an eternal perspective. He wants to maximize our influence for the kingdom. Essentially, what he's saying is, I'm asking you to accept difficulty as the price of influence. Our Father wants the world to come to Christ, and we are ambassadors of the gospel. But if we're unwilling to be placed in situations or to stay in situations that are challenging or uncomfortable, we will never have influence with anyone. And Jesus asks us to be in the world, but not of the world. How God asks us to live is how we will have the most influence with people who need the gospel. How God asks us to live with an unsaved boss, how to serve an unsaved boss, is how we can gain influence with that boss. How he asks us to live with an unsaved spouse is how we gain influence with that unsaved spouse. How we deal with unsaved neighbors is how we gain influence with unsaved neighbors. That's what Peter's writing about in the context of this message. And it's really important, again, not only for them, but for us. This letter could have been written to any Christian in the 21st century because you just see it. But we don't just have an eternal perspective, although what we endure, we do endure for their eternity. Just think about that. Bless you. What we endure, we do endure for their eternity. But your Abba Daddy will never ask you to endure anything that will go unnoticed or unrewarded. Our God is just. He's just. And he's going to look at you, Jeff, and say, Jeff, this is what I've called you to do. And yes, I know it's difficult, and I know you can only do it by grace, and I know it's not pleasant, but trust me, either in this life or the life to come, I will bless you. I will bless you. You can trust God. Now, I don't believe God calls us to be abused. I don't believe God calls us to be exploited. I mean, although I shouldn't say that. There are times he does. But in general, I'm not saying to stay in a situation where you're physically at risk or your kids are at risk or anything like that. Please hear me. I'm not going there. But I'm saying that rather than creating an attitude where we resent and we complain and we just don't understand, God, why have you placed me here? We need to have an attitude, if you have placed me here, then give me the grace to endure it and give me the grace to have influence, to be light in the darkness. That's what I'm saying, because God is just and he will reward you because that's what he does. The second theme that Peter repeats over and over again is that the key to our influence isn't conforming to the culture that's around us. I'll say that again. The key to our influence is not conforming to the culture that is around us. In fact, that is a lie from Satan. The truth is, the greater our contrast, the greater our influence. The more we're dissimilar from the people around us, the more they begin to wonder, what's up with us? Now, with this caveat, it's got to be the right contrast. History is filled with groups and sects who decided to live very different than the community around it, whether it was the Quakers or whether it was the holiness movement or whatever. You can find them all the way throughout Christian history, but they lost influence with the greater culture. It was all about them wanting to be holy rather than them wanting to be influential. Now, when I say it's the right contrast, it has a lot more, it's about more than just our behaviors and our values or how we dress or the words that we use, although these do matter. Peter explicitly says for all of us to be holy. Would you like to hear a story about my misspent high school youth? Great, here's a misspent high school youth. All right, I was on the debate team in high school. Does that surprise anybody? No, it shouldn't surprise anybody. And as a debater, my partner and I were responsible with sneaking the Jack Daniels on overnight debate tournaments. We brought the liquor. I am your pastor, or don't be shocked. So we also had a guy that brought Swisher Sweet cigars because we wanted to look like we smoked cigars, but none of us actually liked the taste. And if you've ever smoked a Swisher Sweet, it's a candy cigar. And so somebody else brought the Playboys or whatever. And I remember we were in West Plains, Missouri on an overnight trip. And we all had snuck in after our host had gone to bed. And we're in somebody's motel room mixing Jack Daniels and Coke that we got from the vending machine down the hall. And we're all lighting up Swisher Sweets and we're all passing around the Playboys. And there was the son of a Baptist minister there, partaking of my Jack Daniels, partaking of our Swisher Sweets, and looking at our Playboys, and he starts to witness to me. And he says, Reece, you're going to hell if you don't receive Christ. And I looked at him, I said, I'm going to go to hell if I don't receive Christ. Well, if your God is going to send me to hell for my lifestyle, but you get a free pass, your God is unfair. Shut down the situation. This is a sidebar. My son asked me, how old were you when you got drunk the first time? Don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. We're going to keep moving. I had one of those conversations this weekend. I was like, oh my gosh. Maybe I shouldn't talk about my past so much. The point of this is that there needs to be a contrast. But it can't just be about behaviors. The most important contrast is how we treat the people who treat us badly. Peter says this in 1 Peter 3:9. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. This is what God has called you to do, and He will grant you His blessing. Does that sound like 21st century America? People do nothing but insult people right and left. It is toxic. It is awful. And when the church embraces that kind of behavior, we lose influence with the lost. We do. Now, we feel good about ourselves, don't we? I mean, those people are a bunch of heathen. I told them off. And it is there's a certain pleasure that we derive out of putting people in their place. We do that. But is it influential? No. Does it help us to win souls? No. It is wrong to behave the way that they do. The contrast that gives us the most influence is to treat people way better than they deserve, because you have an eternal focus and you trust in a just God who says that if somebody takes advantage of you, my God's going to make it right, because you can't curse me beyond my God's ability to bless me. And here is the really nasty part of this. God is just, and if the world does not find the grace of God for themselves before they die, it is appointed unto each man to die and then to face judgment. The truth of the matter is, my friend from high school was not going to heaven because of his behaviors. He was going to heaven because he'd found the grace of God. Now, he was ineffective in his witness because his lifestyle did not conform to his teachings. But he was going to heaven because he found God's grace. And at 57 years old, 40 years after this incident, I'm going to heaven not because I don't drink Jack Daniels or smoke Swisher Sweets anymore. I'm going to heaven because I found the grace of God. And if the world doesn't find it, what a tragedy for the world. So, we're called to live with an eternal focus. We're called to trust in a just God. We're called to treat people better than they deserve, to live in contrast with the culture that is around us. But in order to do that, we got to forgive some people who've hurt us. People who've taken advantage of us. There are scars that enter our hearts. I was sharing with somebody just this week about how I told somebody off and it felt so good because they reminded me of somebody who'd taken advantage of me. Yeah. It's not a very, I was kind of proud of it for a moment until I realized I was preaching this message, and then I thought, oh wow, that's a lousy example. But hopefully you'll have a better example. But what about those issues that I haven't repented of or been forgiven of or forgiven other people for? So I just want to take a second for you to have a connection with your Father. And if there's some people who've hurt you in your past, forgive them. If there's some difficult injuries that have been inflicted upon you, ask God for the grace to go beyond them so that you can begin to live in contrast with the world that's around us. Because if we don't deal with those hurts, they will come with us wherever we go. So let's just pray for a second. Just pray. Pray, forgive the people. And we're going to be going into another point. The message is not over yet. But just pray. I know some people who took advantage of me. And God, I forgive them. And I treat people sometimes based on the injury that they've inflicted. And I don't want to, God. I don't want to do that. I don't want to drag that with me any further. And I just pray, God, that I can leave those things in the past. And I forgive them, Father. in Jesus' name. The last thing I want to share with you is that to be influential, we not only have to have an eternal perspective and trust a just God, we not only have to live in contrast with the world, but we also have to accurately communicate the gospel in a compelling way. In 1 Peter 3, 14 through 17, and this is one of the most challenging verses to me in the whole New Testament, but it says, "But even if you suffer for doing what is right, God will reward you for it. So don't worry or be afraid of their threats. Instead, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it." Can each of us explain what my friend in West Plains, Missouri could not? Why am I going to heaven? Can we explain that? Can we talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ? Can we talk about when people treat us badly? See, my hope has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with Him. And the reason this is important is the gospel has everything to do with the blood of Christ and the sacrifice at Calvary. And our hope has everything to do with His resurrection from the dead. Because He was resurrected, I know we can be resurrected, which is what we celebrate whenever we receive communion. And so I've asked two things to happen. I've asked that the ushers prepare communion for us this morning. I'd like them to come forward and begin to serve you. Now, we're not going to do our confession as we typically do. And if you're a visitor or a guest, we have open communion here. So anyone can receive communion if you're a believer in Christ, and we leave it up to you to decide that. But we refuse communion to no one here, so you're welcome to participate. If you're watching us online, I encourage you now to go and get the elements. But I want us to hold the elements until the end so that we can take them together. And I picked a very specific communion song to play while the ushers are serving you. I asked the worship team if they would play an old hymn from the 1800s called "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." And as you are singing this, I want you to look at the lyrics, which we should have up, correct, Tyler? Because these lyrics articulate the gospel of Jesus Christ and the reason for the hope that we all embrace. And I want us to remember these because somebody is going to ask you sometime, why do you act so differently? And why do you turn the other cheek? And why do you show grace to people who treat you so poorly? And you say, it's because of what Jesus has done for me. If you guys could play.
Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to rest upon His promise, and to know thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Oh, how sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust His cleansing blood, and in simple faith to plunge me 'neath the healing cleansing flood. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him more and more. Jesus, so sweet to trust in Jesus, just from sin and self to cease, just from Jesus simply taking life and rest and joy and peace. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I've proved him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more.
In our hands, we hold a wafer that is symbolic of the body of Christ, the body that was bruised for our iniquities. And the chastisement of our peace is upon him. It is by his stripes that we are healed. This is the message that we can share. This is the reason that we are willing to endure obnoxious, difficult people and horrible sometimes situations, because we have an eternal perspective and we trust in a just God who showed us the example that suffering can bring about great blessings if we do it for the right reason and in the right way. Let's remember this as we partake of the body. We hold in our hand a cup of juice that is symbolic of the blood of Christ. And in this juice is a reminder of a new covenant, a covenant that is unbreakable, that's for all eternity. Any person can be saved if they just put their faith in this. And this is the incredible message that we have been tasked or given the privilege of sharing. And let us remember this as we remind ourselves of our own righteousness that we all walk in, because he has declared us righteous. Let us drink. Encounter Church, I love you. I know we have great things ahead. The ushers will be passing the buckets to pick up the elements. I just want to encourage you this week to continue to look for opportunities to do good and heal those who have been oppressed of the enemy, to share Jesus in love with our city and world, to be light in dark places, and to not resent sometimes the difficult assignment that Christ calls us to, but to look for the grace to not only endure, but be a blessing to people who, frankly, might not deserve it. Go with God. We love you. Don't forget to get your tickets, or remember to bring a pie on a Wednesday. Looking forward to seeing you. Go with God.